So it's now finally time. After a lot of work, I've now completely finished my home network install and got everything installed and moved in. So we're now ready to take a look at it all. If you haven't seen it previously, I've done a full video of where I installed my home network, so you can go and watch that, and that shows all the cabling that I did. But I've now got all the actual equipment and hardware in and running, so we can actually take a look at the full system, all the network hardware, all the AV equipment I've installed, and see how it all works. So what we'll now do is we'll go in closer and take a look at everything I've done. So we'll start off here with the hall cupboard, which is the sort of centre of all the cabling that I've done. And we'll go around to take a look at this, and then go off to all the rooms and see all the stuff I've installed there. So now we'll take a look at the less interesting stuff first. So here's just the standard electrical switchgear, which seemed to confuse a lot of people in the comments about what this all was and why the electric meter was inside. But this is just a standard UK setup. This is how it is in the vast majority of UK homes. So it's probably different to other countries, but this is completely standard for what you'd have in the UK. And as before, we've got my BT master socket for my broadband, although I've now had this triple socket added, which allows me to power stuff that's in the cupboard. I went for the triple one because currently I need at least two, one for the TV amp, one for the rack, and that gives me another spare socket in case I install something else later. There's then just a standard consumer unit with a bunch of MCBs and RCDs in it, including a new circuit that had to be installed to fit this socket. Just that's what the electrician did. So, yep, that's all installed absolutely fine. These two plugs, we then have this one that goes up the wall to the TV amp, and then this one which goes round the room and goes to the rack, and we'll take a look at that next. Then we've got the master socket. This is a standard BT master socket, although I've installed the Mark III OpenReach faceplate. This is something they used to give you with their fibre to the cabinet installs, but they've stopped doing it now and just give you a standard ADSL microfilter to plug in instead. Thankfully I already had one of these, so I've installed it on the master socket, and the good thing with this is that it gives you a sort of a pair of connections to install a pair of wires onto to extend the DSL connection to somewhere else. So that's what I've done. I've run this piece of Cat6 which comes down into the master socket and connects in. This cable isn't Ethernet, this is the DSL connection. And we'll see in a second, but this goes up to the patch panel and allows my modem to connect very neatly. So there isn't a cable trailing from the modem and plugging straight into the front of this. It's all completely hidden and all the wires are neatly stuck to the wall. So that's quite a nice neat solution to connecting that all up. So now here's the wall rack. I do apologise for the handheld camera again, it's just there's no way you can fit a tripod in here and it's too high up the wall really for the tripod to extend up to. But here's the wall cabinet with all the networking equipment. And out at the bottom there's just a standard bit of main flex that I've added onto that PDU to extend it, so it runs neatly around the hall cupboard, along the bottom there, and goes straight up to that plug. So there's no wires trailing, they're all neatly tacked to the wall. So now let's see what we have in here. So open that up, just a key switch, key lock. And along here at the top we have the patch panel like I had before, but now it's all connected. You can also probably see above there, I've labelled all the ports. So the numbers below the ports relate to the actual port number on the wall, each port's numbered. But then above I've labelled it just with what room it's in. It just makes it a little bit clearer to make it a little bit easier to understand where all the ports go to. And what you'll see over here is that DSL connection. So whereas all these are standard Cat6 Ethernet cables going to the switch, that there is a much thinner cable, and that's an RJ45 to RJ11 cable that connects my modem up. So that long bit of Cat6 coming out the master socket terminates at this port here and then goes to the modem. And it's not a very long run and it still syncs at the absolute maximum speed, so it's absolutely fine. Next up down here we have my switch. This is a Unify switch, 24 port. It's not the PoE one, just because I've only got one PoE device, so there's no point really. So it's just a non-PoE version, and I'm really happy with it. It's really power efficient, it's completely silent once you've powered it on, which the PoE ones might not be, they've got fans in them. This does have a fan, but it turns off as soon as you turn it on. And it's a very nice switch, so you can see that's it there. There's then all the ports connected into it, and then the modem just connects at the end here. These four yellow ones here are in an LACP link aggregation. That's the link between here and the switch in the living room that we'll take a look at, so there's four connections there. It just provides a sort of higher bandwidth backbone between the two switches really, since these switches aren't like 10 gig capable or anything. Next up we have this, which is the Unify PoE injector, just the standard one that came with the access point. There wasn't any point getting a PoE switch because there's only the one PoE access point, but you can see it plugs into mains down here into the PDU, and then there's one of these connections goes straight to the switch, then the other one goes round and up and into the patch panel at the top there. You can see that red one going into port 9. That's the access point. Next we have the OpenReach modem. This is my modem for my ISP. For people wondering, there were comments in the previous video, my connection is a fibre to the cabinet connection through PlusNet. It's 80 meg down, 20 up, so it's pretty good. I've got a static IP address and everything with that, and it's really cheap. So, well, relatively cheap. So I'm very happy with the connection, really. I had an absolute nightmare with PlusNet trying to move in here. They put me on the wrong speed, and then there was a huge nightmare trying to get them to fix it. So, not overly happy with their customer service in that regards, but now as it's working, it's absolutely great. So, the modem's here, and yep, there's that cable that goes up the patch panel, and then the Ethernet cable going to the switch, and it's just powered off of this power brick. To mount these, what I did is this is an old 3U blanking plate that I had from before, and it's a standard metal blanking plate. So to mount the PoE injector, as you can see, I just drilled a hole on either side of it, put a zip tie through, and that holds it really securely. For the modem has sort of like little hooks on the back to hook into like screws that are screwed into a wall. So all I did was drill a pair of holes through the metal blanking plate, put a bolt through with a nut on the back, and then just hook this on like you would hook it on a screw. So it's all properly securely attached and neatly mounted in the cabinet. Then finally down here you can see you've just got the PDU I had before with the 3 devices plugged into it, and then just the main power switch there. So overall I'm very happy with how this rack turned out. It's really neat, and yeah, you can shut the door and the cables do sort of fit. They press against the glass a little bit, but nothing major. And yeah, it's really good. I'm very happy with the hardware I've got here as well. The switch is great, and I'm using the OpenReach modem. A lot of ISPs now provide you with their own router modem combo thing that's just rubbish, which PlusNet did give me. However, thankfully previously when I signed up they gave me this, so I've been able to continue using my OpenReach modem, which is just so much easier. There's no faff with their own router, just plug this in, connect it to it with PPPoE, and it just works. So yeah, that's the wall rack. Next thing in the hall cupboard is the TV Erial Distribution. This should also be the last bit of handheld camera I'll need to do. But you can see, I showed this before, but I'll show it again just in case people haven't seen it. Here's the Erial amp, which is just a standard 4-way Erial amplifier with F-plugs coming out, and all the cables just go from there up into the ceiling. So there's a main feed coming in here, and then there's a connection out to the bedroom, office and living room. And I'm very happy with this little thing. The only problem is the blue light on it is this most stupidly bright thing. If you open the cupboard door, it lights the whole hall up. I don't know why they make them so bright, but yeah, it works well. And there you can see that's the cable from the master socket as well. That goes up past the Erial lamp, and then also goes through the ceiling like that. So yeah, that's set up in the hall cupboard. So what we'll now do is we'll just go around room by room and take a look at what I've installed in each room. So first room we'll take a look at is the hall, where there's nothing really that exciting. We've just got these 2 ports I installed down here, which were the first ports I fitted. They were installed more as a test rather than anything, but there used to be a big unit here from the previous owners, so what I'll probably do is get a big unit for here, and those ports could be useful if I ever put something on the unit. I might put a printer there just to keep it somewhere out of the way, or if I got, like I say, a smart home control panel or something like that, there's those ports there that I can plug something into. So they're not super useful right now, but I might put a unit there, so may as well have them, and they're fairly neat, they don't look too bad. So yep, that's the 2 ports in the hall. So the only other thing we have in the hall is my access point, which is this Unify AP Pro. It's a fairly old one, it's from the original gen of Unify access points, so while it is the Pro one, so it is dual band and supports, you know, full-on PoE, not the sort of weird voltage one, it's not a AC access point, so it's not incredible performance, but it will sustain the speed of my internet connection. So if I'm browsing about the internet on a laptop, it's absolutely fine. I'll probably upgrade it at some point though, but it works for now. To mount this, what I actually did is it just pops off like that, and you'll see I've drilled these 2 extra holes here and put these 2 screws in. That's because what I've done is in the ceiling I've installed a standard 1-gang dry lining box, and then I just put these 2 holes into the back plate of this and screwed it into the dry lining box, which means I don't need to worry about raw plugs or anything to fix it to the ceiling. I just put those in and it's nicely mounted. And I think from what I've seen, the newer Unify ones fit natively onto those back boxes, which is why I installed it. So that's fairly neat up there, sits completely out of the way, just looks like the smoke alarm, doesn't it? So, in fact, it looks nicer than the smoke alarm, so yeah, it's pretty neat up there, and that gives me a completely good wireless signal throughout the place, because it's all quite thin plasterboard walls, so there's really nothing to block signal, so I get a completely fine signal throughout the entire flat, which is great. The next room we have is probably the least interesting one, and that is the kitchen, where I've installed these 2 ports in the corner, which were pretty much put in as a bit of a joke. There wasn't really a use for them. although they did actually prove really useful. Because when I had to have the electrician to install those sockets, but because I needed to add some stuff to do at work that day, I couldn't just take the day off, so I had to work from home, which was fine, except for the fact that the electrician needed to cut power to all the circuits, or well, all the sockets throughout the flat, which meant it would kill my router, so I wouldn't be able to use the internet, which I kind of need for when I'm working from home. However, all the sockets in the kitchen are on a separate circuit, so what I was able to do was patch a connection from the DSL port on the patch panel through to one of these, moving my DSL phone connection through to here. I was then able to hook up a basic router, just this basic PlusConnect one sitting down here, to that DSL connection on that wall plate and plug it into the socket in here, which meant that even when the electrician had all the sockets throughout the rest of the flat on, there was still power in here, and therefore the router stayed active, so I was able to just sit and use a laptop and get some work done. So I did actually use one of the sockets in the kitchen. I don't know how much I'll use them going forwards, but they did actually prove to be useful at least once. So now here we are in the bedroom, where stuff starts to get a bit more interesting because we're now starting to look at actual equipment that's installed. So up on the wall here we have my TV. It's my old main TV, but it wasn't really big enough for this flat, so I've moved it to the bedroom. It's a 32-inch Samsung. It's a smart TV from about 2013, so it's fairly good, but it's nothing special, but it's absolutely fine for like a bedroom like this. So it's mounted on the wall up there on an angled bracket, so it's fairly high up, and then tilted down so it's really good to view from bed, which is sort of where the camera's sitting right now. And yeah, I'm pretty happy. And then behind the TV, I've got some other stuff hooked up, so we'll go and take a look at that now. So now we're back in the handheld camera again. It's just significantly easier to film this way for things like this. But we can see we have the TV here, but if we look around the back, we can see we have this. So this is that Z83 mini PC I reviewed before, and it's just mounted to the wall. So all I did is I used the VESA mounting bracket, but instead of mounting it to a monitor, I screwed it into the wall. And it's pretty secure there. Obviously it flaps at the top, but it's completely securely held on, and it works great. So that's plugged into the TV over HDMI. There's an aerial connection there, and then there's an Ethernet connection from both the TV and the PC that plug into the wall there. So all that's completely neat, completely hidden behind here, and it's fine. There's then the double socket I had installed there, powering everything. So there's now no longer any extension leads powering it. It's powered completely by a socket, like neatly hidden behind it. So that's very neat. The only sort of bodge I had to do is the mini PC uses an external power brick, which I stupidly didn't think of when I put the TV bracket up. So it was put too close to the socket, which meant that the power brick didn't fit. So I just basically made this really short trailing socket that plugs in with a normal plug up there, and then comes down here, and it hides behind it. You don't really see it, it's absolutely fine. And then to power it, I got the electrician obviously to put in that double socket, but the problem with this TV is it's got a stupid red standby light on it that stays on when it's in standby. You can't switch it off, which is a bit annoying from bed. And also that mini PC is quite cheap, and I don't necessarily trust this power brick, so I want to be able to isolate the mains power supply. So what I did for all the TVs that are all the same, I got the electrician to connect it with these sort of spur units. Unfortunately this one's behind a unit. I'll need to show the other ones which are a bit clearer, but I can easily use that just to switch power to that socket behind the TV on and off. So I can easily isolate the TV when I'm not using it. So yeah, that's the bedroom. Now let's take a look at the office. So now here we are in the office, where I've got a fair bit of stuff. I've got my whole PC set up and stuff in here, and this is also where I'll be making most of my videos. So this is why the walls are painted white. It's not really my choice of colour, it's pretty boring and dull, but it means I can easily film against the walls. I don't need to stick up an old bed sheet like I used to in my previous videos. It's a lot nicer to be able to just film directly against these walls without the camera's white balance going mental. So yeah, we'll go in closer and take a look at the various things around here. There's not much, but we'll go and take a look anyway. So first we'll start off looking at something a little bit less exciting, which is just on this wall here, I have a pair of network ports. This is the wall I'll be filming videos against, just because it's the main clear wall in this room that's not got anything on it. So the idea is I can have a table put across here, put the stuff I'm filming on the table, and then there's a pair of ports under there that are useful if I'm filming something that I can want to network. I can just put a cable in, plug it straight in there. So they're quite handy there. The reason I put them in here is just because on the other side of this wall is that bedroom TV. So because I was already running cables to that, it was really easy to put an extra 2 ports in here, so that's why they're in this place where they are. So now let's take a look at something a bit more interesting. So next thing we have here is my PC setup. Now I don't go down the crazy battle stations route of having a crazy setup with LED lights or anything. It's more just to be functional, it's just there. But we'll go through and see what I've got anyway. So the desk's an IKEA Galant, I think it is. I've had it a couple of years now. It's massive, but it's also incredibly sturdy, which is good because those monitors weigh an absolute ton. So speaking of the monitors, these are a pair of Hasbro HZ27WBs. I got them a good few years ago now. They're 1440p, so they're pretty good. They're 27 inch, and they're really nice monitors. They're completely solid steel casing though, so they're the most stupidly heavy monitors ever, which is why the desk almost does tilt backwards a little bit, but it should be fine. They're very basic. They don't really even have an on-screen menu system. They've just got a brightness control, a power inlet, and a DVI port, and that's it. So they're getting on a bit, and they're CFL backlit, so they use a lot of power and get really hot, but the picture on them is absolutely great, and there's so much screen real estate with that resolution, so I'm really happy with them. I might upgrade them down the line, but for now they're absolutely fine. On the desk you can then see my mouse, which is on Alienware Tactics. It's quite old. I need to replace it at some point. It's acting up a little bit. I'll probably get another MX Master because I've got one at work and I really like it, so I'll probably get one for here. The speakers are Bose Companion 2. They're not very exciting. The keyboard is a Philco Majestouch, which has Cherry MX Blue switches. I reviewed this ages ago somewhere, but it's a really nice keyboard. It's been going for years. I got this in 2011. So, yep, really happy with that. And then finally, under the desk, you can see the PC, which is my standard AMD Ryzen build that I did a video of previously. The only real change since that video is that I've upgraded the graphics card now, so it's now got an RX 580 in it instead of the 770 I had previously. So, it's not an insane setup, but for what I do, it's absolutely perfect. And this is also the cleanest this desk has ever been. I mean, I will admit I just chucked loads of stuff in a pile in the corner for filming it, but my desk is normally a complete mess, so, well, look at it while it's tidy for once, I suppose. And then finally in the office, we have my TV up on the wall. This is really nothing fancy. It's an old 22-inch Sony from about 2011. It's fine. I mean, it's not even full HD or anything, but for what I do with this TV, it's absolutely fine. It's just up there on the wall, and it's really just so if I'm working at my desk on something and I want a bit of background noise, I can just chuck some random TV program on and just have it running there in the background. So it's definitely not for sort of full-on viewing at all, but for what it's used for, it's absolutely fine. It is technically a smart TV, so it is plugged into the network up there, although I never really use the smart stuff on that because it's so out of date. But for what it's used for, it's absolutely fine up there. Unfortunately, you can see the sockets are visible behind that. That's because I initially measured it all, put the TV up, put the sockets in, thought it was great, until I sat down at the desk and realised I'd put it so high up it would break my neck to look at it. So I had to move the TV down a bit, which is why the sockets stick out above it. For in the office though, it's fine because the room isn't designed for style, it's designed to be functional, so that's fine. And down the line, when I probably get a bigger TV anyway, it'll probably hide them, so it's not a big deal. But yeah, that is the TV. So that's the office sorted. Now let's take a look at something more interesting, which is the living room, which has the full AV setup in it. So now here we are in the living room where I have my full AV setup. So there's a lot more interesting stuff in terms of cabling and actual equipment here. So we'll now go in and take a look at each bit one by one and see what we have. So now here's my TV setup. So the TV, which I have reviewed previously on my channel, is a 49-inch Sony Bravia XE80. It's a 4K TV, it's one of Sony's sort of more entry-level ones, but overall I absolutely love it, it's great, it looks amazing. So that's wall mounted there. And then we have my speakers, so I've got a 5.1 system in here, with the 3 speakers at the front, and then a further 2 at the back of the room. These are modern short speakers. The satellites around the room are MS302s, and then centre speakers an MS304. They're all wall mounted just on basic brackets, but they work absolutely fine. And they sound pretty good. I bought them on Amazon, or not on Amazon, on eBay years ago really cheap because I got them used. But they actually work well, and even though they're silver, which is a bit out of fashion now, they actually blend in quite nicely against the wall, so I'm very happy with them. So, yep, that's my speaker setup there. Now down behind the living room TV, we've got some various connections, so you can see there's a double socket that's powering the TV, only one of them's used. And then here's the ports I've installed. So what you can see here is there's 2 Ethernet ports, satellite, TV aerial, and HDMI. Now you'll notice the HDMI is here and the satellite's over here, which is different from the previous video. That's because only after installing all this, I discovered that Freeview and that HDMI signals cables interfere with Freeview. So when this was mounted next to when the HDMI cable was mounted next to the aerial connection, I would just lose certain Freeview channels, and it took me ages to figure out what the problem was. Thankfully the cable in the wall is fine, it doesn't cause the issue. I think it's the patch leads I'm using between the TV and the wall that were causing the problem. So I've moved them apart here just to sort that, and it's fixed the issue. but it is worth bearing in mind if you're doing an install to run HDMI away from your aerial connections if you're using Freeview, because it causes weird interference, which is something I never really expected. So that's that there. And then over here we have the power brick for the TV, because as I mentioned in the review of the TV, it requires a large external power brick. So to mount this, all I did is got these little angle brackets, got 4 of those, put them on the wall, slotted the power brick in, and just used these cable ties to fix it on. And it's completely secure on there, and it's completely hidden behind the TV. So even though it does have that external power brick, it's neat enough, it doesn't really cause any issues. So yeah, the TV looks quite neat, all up on the wall there. And now down here we have the spur that feeds the living room TV. This is just a bit easier to see what it looks like because the one in the bedroom is buried, so it's just one of those little brushed stainless steel spur units, which lets me switch power to the TVs on and off. I leave the one in the living room on usually, just because it's an Android TV and takes absolutely ages to boot, but I turn the other ones off and it's just quite neat there. It works absolutely fine. The other benefit of having a fused spur like that means that I could get other sockets added behind the TVs really easily. If it had just been taken as a spur off of the socket without a fuse unit, I would have only been able to have that single double socket there and wouldn't be able to add another one down the line. So yeah, that's fine. And obviously, as I mentioned previously, I will be replacing all the white sockets with nice brushed ones later. Just they're quite expensive, so I'm not going to do it straight away. And yes, I know as people were commenting, the white ones are fine and they're, you know, I'm spending money on nice shiny metal ones, but I just prefer how they look. They look nice, they feel really nice, and they're just a bit more, I don't know, I just like them. And the white ones here anyway, they're okay, they're not dreadful, but the previous owners obviously didn't understand the concept of taking sockets off the wall to paint, so they're covered in paint. There's some that are a bit broken and things, so yeah, I'll replace them all with nice ones to match those spur units. In the living room, I've also added this pair of network points down here. This is just behind the couch, so it's quite useful if I'm sort of sitting on the couch and I need to plug something in. I can just reach over, plug a cable in, and it's there. This corner is also quite good because there's nothing really in it, so there is a chance down the line I might put a unit here which might have something network connected on it. So those ports are there. It's on the other side of the wall from where the kitchen ports are, so yep, that's another 2 ports in the living room. So now we can finally take a look at one of the more interesting parts, which is my main rack. I've pulled it out from the wall, it's not normally at this jointy angle, but it sits in the corner of the living room really neatly and holds all the equipment that I need. You can also see down inside of it we have my subwoofer, which is a Tannoy EFX, I think. Again, I got it quite cheap on eBay, but it works absolutely fine. And yeah, that sits down there. So here we have the rack. This is a 15U rack, and it's made by a company called Z-Pass, and it's their SJB model. They're quite cheap if I remember correctly. I bought it from eBay, and it was a really good deal, and it works absolutely brilliantly. The only problem with it is turns out it's not flat pack, so it arrived completely, like fully assembled in the back of a truck, which wasn't great. It was even sent with a specialist courier company, which meant that when I was out during the delivery, I got a call from the courier asking how long it would take me to get home for them, because they were actually willing to wait for me to get back to give me the thing, because it was like some specialist transport company. It was weird. And moving it between flats is also not easy. But now it's in here, it looks great. So you can see it's just a fairly nice sort of, almost like beige coloured rack, grey coloured rack, with a sort of smoked glass door, which looks really good, and it sort of blocks a bit of the light coming out from the LEDs so they're not glary. You can also see that it's sort of got the wooden top, which is slightly raised up. That's something I did myself. Effectively all I did was take the bolts out that it came with and buy new bolts and put some nuts on to sort of raise the wooden part up from the metal, which gives a little gap. And I've then installed a 120mm PC fan in the top, blowing air out, which helps keep all the equipment cool. So that was a very simple sort of modification I did to it, and it keeps everything at a completely fine temperature. So now let's go in a little bit closer and look at all the equipment I have in here. So at the top of the rack we have my AV equipment. So what you can see here is we have my AV receiver, which is a Denon AVR X2400H that I reviewed previously. Since that review I have used this unit really heavily, and it's excellent. I absolutely love this thing, it's great. So I mean, it's way more than I need, but it does everything I've asked of it, so I'm really happy with this receiver. And that just sits on this basic rack shelf here. I have seen that you can buy sort of custom made rack mount kits for things like this, where you'd come with a nice sort of faceplate that would go over it, that would, you know, completely blank it off, and then just the front of the receiver would stick through. So I might look into getting one of those to make it look a bit nicer, rather than just sort of sitting on this shelf. But overall it's really neat there. Also that screw isn't in all the way, I'll need to... Oops, I'll do that after the video. So that's the receiver there. Then below it we have my home theatre PC. This is a 2U rack mount PC I built. It's just a home theatre machine, but it's just built in a rack case just to be neat in here. It's nothing particularly fancy. It's an AMD FX 4300. It's got either 4 or 8 gigs of RAM, I can't remember. I think it's maybe 4. It's not huge, it's fine. It's got a 60 gig SSD, doesn't really need more than that. But because I got the 4K TV, I've upgraded the graphics card, so it's now got a GT 1030 in it, which is just the cheapest card I could find that had an HDMI 2.0 output, just so it can do 4K properly. I'll probably end up upgrading this down the line, something a bit newer, so it supports all the cryptography standards that are required for playback of streaming 4K content. So I think I maybe need to go to Kaby Lake or something for that. But for now, this machine's absolutely fine. Another thing here is, you might be able to make it out up here within this gap. There is this little USB extension lead, which has a Logitech Unifying receiver in it. That's just for the keyboard and mouse, or keyboard and touchpad that I use to control this PC. By putting it on an extension cable and tucking it in up there, it just means I get a better signal because it's not sealed within a metal box. So that's what that is there. You can also just about make out in the top of the rack, here we have that 120mm case fan, which is mounted on an anti-vibration rubber mount. So you can hear it in the room, but it's really not bad. So that was all the AV setup in the rack. So now at the bottom of the rack, we have a bit more of the sort of IT side of things. So we'll go and take a look at that. So here we have another Unify switch. This switch connects up to the main switch over that lag, which is these 4 cables here, and then it connects to all the other equipment in this rack. So it's just another non-PoE one. There's nothing PoE related here, so there's no point having a PoE one, and it works absolutely brilliantly. So there's a switch. Above it we have my router. I decided not to go Unify for routing, partially because I already had this, and partially just because I like quite a bit of flexibility and control over my router. I wanted to be able to do things and try all different experiments, and for me the Unify system was just a bit too restrictive in that side. If I was going Ubiquity on the routing, I would be happy with one of the Edge routers, but I don't think I would go for a Unify router, so that's why I've kept Unify for the switches and the access point, but I'm going to go with a separate router. So this is that cheap AliExpress Celeron PC I looked at before, and since that video it's worked absolutely brilliantly as a router. Due to the whole various issues with pfSense and OpenSense and that side of things, I've moved off of that and moved back to Vios, which I'd used previously. So it's now running Vios, and it's acting as my router, and I am extremely happy with it. I cannot fault it, it's excellent. So you can see there, that's connected up to the main switch. There's these 4 connections here, which as before are in that lag, just for that little bit of extra bandwidth through the router. And then this green connection here is a WAN connection, that goes to the modem. Effectively the modem plugs into the other switch, and it's on its own VLAN that's trunked through to this switch, which then comes out here and goes into the router. I could have put the router in the hall cupboard rack right next to the modem, but the problem with that would be just that rack's not got that much space in it, it's not got any cooling in it, and I didn't want to add too much weight to it, and I just like having this in here. This is all the actual active IT stuff, and that rack's just got a switch in it. It's just easy to keep it a bit simpler. So, yeah, that's the router there. Now below it we have my main server. This is a Fujitsu Primergy TX1310M1. As with a lot of stuff here, I have reviewed this previously. It's nothing fancy. It's a Xeon E3 processor, 16 gigs of RAM, 4 1TB hard drives, and it's just running bare FreeBSD, bare metal, and then I'm using a single Beehive virtual machine which runs Debian, which is hosting the Unify controller software, just because that works better under Linux. Under BSD it's really a bit fiddly to get working, so that's all this thing does. So it's effectively just hosts the Unify controller, the development web server, and then it's a file server for just storing my stuff. So it's nothing mental, but it's absolutely fine. It is a tower server and it's mounted on a shelf. It's not the neatest thing ever, but it works. I was going to build a rack server, but when I bought this thing was so cheap. I think I paid 350 quid for it. There was no way I could get something rack mounted for that price, so I went with this. Down the line I might replace this with something rack mounted, but the difficulty is that this rack is quite short depth, so you're really limited to what you can fit in it. So we'll see. I'll probably need to build something custom. I don't think I'll get a suitable off-the-shelf rack server that'll fit, but we'll see. But for now, this server's absolutely great. Then finally at the bottom of the rack we have my APC PDU, which is, I think, it's 8 ports, and everything connects in, and it's network managed, so you can go in remotely and switch things on and off and remotely reboot stuff, which I don't use that much, but it can be useful. You know, if I'm away from home and the server starts acting up, I could remotely connect into it and, you know, power cycle the server through this, which is quite handy. So now here we are looking at all the cabling and connections behind the rack. So this is all the connections to the network and various stuff around the room. So let's go in closer and see what we have here. on this wall we have the power and network. So here we've got a standard double socket that came with the flat, and we've got this plug here that goes off to that PDU. So that's the standard just IEC 15 amp cable, goes into PDU and then connects in here. So that's just the main power to everything in the rack. On the left hand side we then have those 4 wall ports. Those are that link aggregation, and that is the trunk between the 2 switches. So there's those 4 ports there that go into the switch here, and then on the other end of that they go into the switch in the hall cupboard. So that's what those are there, and they're just numbered just what port they go into on the switch, just to make it a bit clearer when I was connecting it all up. So now here we are looking at the rear wall behind the rack, and here we have all the AV wiring. On the right hand side there's a faceplate with all the speaker connections, which are all plugged in with banana plugs. That faceplate and those modules I've used can either take banana plugs, or you can just feed the bare wire in and screw it on. But doing that's just a complete pain, so I end up just buying a bunch of banana plugs, putting them on the wires, and then they can easily be plugged in and unplugged like little patch leads, which is a really neat way of doing it. It makes life so much easier if I need to move the rack completely out of the way. So that's there. On the left hand side we then have all the Erial and HDMI wiring. So on the right hand side we can see we have an HDMI module. That's just what you'd expect. The other end of that goes to the AV receiver in the rack, and then from that faceplate there, the cable goes up and then is terminated at that port behind the TV. So effectively all that is this HDMI cable goes to the receiver, and then the other end goes to the TV. So that's fairly simple. Next to that we have the quad Plex module for the incoming signal to the flat. Effectively the way this works is this flat gets delivered 2 coax cables. One of those carries a single satellite feed, the other one carries another satellite feed, as well as the TV aerial and the DAB radio aerial. And all those are at different frequencies, so they're all multiplexed onto the same cable. Those 2 coaxes go into that module here, which is this dual width one here, which separates out those signals and gives 2 satellite ports, a TV aerial port and a DAB aerial port. So that's all behind here. And then on the left hand side we have a pair of return connections, which is how the aerial signal coming in here links up to other stuff. So on top we have the satellite connection. Effectively there's this little F-plug patch lead here that comes out of the incoming satellite connection and plugs in on the left here. That connection on the left here goes up to behind the TV. So effectively all this cable does is plug the TV, which ends up here, into the satellite feed here. So that's what that is. Down here we then have the TV aerial, which again comes out of the quadplex faceplate here, goes to the return connection here, and the other end of that ends up at the distribution amplifier in the hall cupboard. Now down here we can see we have this little amplifier. In the previous video I installed this inside the wall. Since then I thought there's no real point having it hidden away because the rack's in front of it, so I moved it out and mounted it on the wall there just to make it a bit easier to access and service, and just meant there's no active circuitry hidden in the wall. So I thought that's a bit better. Now in the comments of the previous videos people got a bit confused and excited and freaked out by this and didn't seem to understand why it was there. So we'll go over that quickly. So first thing is, this is not a cable system. A lot of people seem to think this was like a cable TV system. It's not. In the UK you don't really get cable TV to the extent you get it in the US. In the UK you can get cable TV through Virgin Media, but it's not the norm. This is a standard TV terrestrial connection which is delivered over an aerial on the roof of the building, so it's an RF system coming through the air. The problem is that by the time the signal reaches this faceplate here, it's really weak. And I have measured this using like the 22-inch TV in the office. That's got a really good signal meter on it, so I was using that. And you can see that as soon as the signal's here, it's about 40% on the scale. It's really a weak signal. And then if you put a long coax cable, even just a 10-meter patch lead, or a 5-meter patch lead I think it was, that I had sitting around, if you plug the TV in with that, it starts dropping channels. So that's the issue here. So what I've done is this amplifier just has the shortest length of coax from that faceplate and then boosts the signal. And that means it can survive that long length of coax that goes to the hall cupboard. And I have checked all the signal levels with that TV signal meter. They all show absolutely fine. The signal isn't coming in strong, it's not overpowering equipment. In fact, since after installing that amplifier, it's solved all my TV aerial problems and hasn't caused any. So yeah, it's maybe not the best practice way of doing it, but it's definitely fixed the issue. So yeah, that's the wiring behind here. And yes, I have actually had to rearrange all this as well because of the HDMI connection causing interference. The trick is when I push the rack back, I just need to make sure this HDMI cable moves away to the side here and doesn't drift over towards this aerial stuff. At that point it works fine. So that would be a bit of advice I would give. If you're installing HDMI, try and keep it as far away from aerials as possible. If I was doing this again, I probably wouldn't put it on this same faceplate. I'd probably have a completely separate faceplate with a separate back box and put HDMI on that rather than having it here, because it was just causing interference issues, which were very hard to track down. So there you go. That was finally a look at my whole home network and AV installation that I've done. And overall, I'm extremely happy with it. It just works absolutely brilliantly. I've not really had any major issues now it's all been installed. Everything works fine. And it's just great having everything connected, no wires visible, and just performance is great. And yeah, it was definitely a worthwhile project, and it was really fun to do. So yeah, thank you very much for watching, and stand by for possibly other various sort of home DIY smart device type videos coming down the line, so we'll see how we get along with that. But yeah, thank you very much for watching.